So a few years ago, I was working at a big firm, and there was a consultation about the employee benefit. So the partners wanted to make the employee benefits better. And there were all kinds of ideas that were being put about. Do you guys want to have an in-house doctor, a casual clothing policy, dress down Fridays, that kind of thing, some kind of matched charity donation system? And the consultation meant that you had to look at all of these different suggestions on the computer and rate them and say, yeah, I'm kind of interested in that, less interested in that, 3 out of 5, 1 out of 5. So I replied to the consultation, and I was talking with a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, about it. Sort of a few days later, I said, what did you put down in the consultation? Well, he said, I gave everything 0 except 2 things, more pay and more holiday. And he said to me, Dan, don't give me that look. Those are the only 2 reasons why anybody goes to work, pay and holiday. And of course, he was kidding, but also not kidding, because with the exception of one more thing, which might be social status, I suspect that for a lot of people, he's right, that that's largely why we go to work. Now, don't get me wrong, if you were here listening to Pete last week, you'll know that providing for ourselves is a really important part of what work is, and it's something that God sets us as one of the tasks in work. But the point I make today is this: there's a lot more to it than that. And in this series over the next few weeks, we're going to be thinking about other reasons why we go to work, the purpose of work in other ways. Genesis is a rich account, and it gives many reasons. We've got 4 of them coming up. But today we're looking at this one, so let's look at this verse together. A couple of preliminary notes, though, before we do the close reading. First note, if you're here as somebody who does unpaid work, and actually most of us do that in some way or another, whether it's looking after a relative, or taking charge of a home, or volunteering, that's work. So I'm talking to you. Pete said that last week. I'm saying it again today. This is not just about paid work. Second thing, I sort of joked at the beginning about how short this passage is that we're looking at. And so there's sometimes a feeling when we have talks like this that I'm trying to get too much out of just a few words. Now, there are a number of answers to that, but let me give you just one. The way Genesis has come to us today is through a process that way back when it started originated by people passing on orally from one to another, generation to generation, these stories. What does that mean? It means that when you read a sentence in Genesis, you're reading something that dozens of people over hundreds of years have looked at and decided, yeah, this matters. I need to tell my daughter or my neighbour what this says. So the process of how Genesis comes to be with us today means that it's a really lean text. There's nothing in it that doesn't need to be there, and everything in it is significant. So I hope that convinces you that actually it's worth dwelling on these few words and seeing what they're trying to capture. So, yeah, now we're looking at it. What do I want to see out of this verse? I want to see 2 things in the time available. First of all, where does God put Adam? And secondly, what Adam has to do. So where God puts Adam, and then what Adam has to do. Adam is the man, by the way. I'm sure you got that. His name doesn't actually appear in the verse. But where does God put Adam? He puts him in the Garden of Eden. It's highly significant that God puts Adam in a garden, because a garden is a place where the natural world and human intervention exist in balance together. So let's conjure up an imaginary garden together to visualize this. This is going to be important. We're going to come back to it later. So once you've constructed this garden, keep it. Think of a garden. The trees are kind of spaced apart so that they don't interfere with each other in their roots or branches. Maybe you have let's have some bees. Bees in hives. Hives are near the trees. They're kept so the bees pollinate the trees and the trees bear fruit. Let's have a dog. The dog is in the garden, keeps the deer from coming in and nibbling at the flowers. Right? So that's a picture of a garden. The picture of the garden is of people and nature working in balance. So nature is not wild and untamed, but humans don't have total supremacy and domination either. So to see the significance of this, let's look at where God doesn't put Adam. So on the one hand, God doesn't put Adam in a wilderness, right, where the natural world can threaten and terrify at every turn. And actually that is, when you think about it, what it could have said. That's what, in a conceivable world, a text like this could have said that Adam was born into a wilderness. Indeed, when you think about this from a naturalistic perspective, which is often the only perspective that secular people have, you think of a person being born into a kind of a wild. Saber-toothed tigers are going to eat them, or mammoths are going to crush them, or poisonous mushrooms are going to kill them because they didn't know they were poisonous. So if that were the image, then you'd have a reasonable case for saying that the purpose of work was effectively to save you from this dark adversary that was lurking out there of nature, of the natural world. So we're not in a wilderness, but on the other hand, the other place that God doesn't put the man is in a bulldozer. So he doesn't say, pave over the world. And again, that could have been the image. I mean, it wouldn't have been a bulldozer in the ancient Genesis text, but it could have been a palace, or it could have been a house that isolated him from the natural world. And that's not where God puts Adam. Now, if you were here last week, you will know that Pete spoke about how God told Adam to subdue the earth. And Pete did point out that's a very harsh word, and it conjures up a sort of a fist squishing an orange, getting the juice out of an orange. But this verse tempers that a bit, I think, because if you're in a garden, then yes, you might juice your orange, but presumably you're going to look after the tree so that when next season comes around, you have another orange, and then you have another glass of orange juice. In the film Steve Jobs, the title character says these words: "The most efficient animal on the planet is the condor. The most inefficient animals on the planet are humans. But a human with a bicycle becomes the most efficient animal. And the right computer, a friendly, easy computer that isn't an eyesore, but rather sits on your desk with all the beauty of a tensor lamp, the right computer will be a bicycle for the mind." Now, I don't know if the stuff about the condor is right. But it's a cool idea. And the reason it's a cool idea is because it is the garden. You're putting human ingenuity together with the properties of nature and producing something extraordinary. So the properties of nature in that instance are kind of inspired by the biological, but they're electrical and mechanical. But it doesn't really matter. The principle is the same with the horticultural, because we, as beings in the garden, or Adam in the garden, are in a productive embrace with nature. We're in a fruitful union, creating extraordinary things together. So Adam is placed into the garden. What does he have to do? Well, to work it and take care of it. So taking it in order. First, he has to work it. So, what does he not have to do again? Well, he's not called upon to plant or create the garden. Why not? Because God has already done that. So when the man arrives on the scene, what he has to do is work the garden. He's not the designer, he's not the owner, he's the gardener. And the gardener's job isn't to totally rearrange the garden so that it suits him. It's to work it, to elaborate the existing patterns and potentialities that lie within a pre-existing structure that's already there. And that's important, Because if he deviates from working it and he tries to kind of remake it according to a different design, then he risks negative, profoundly negative consequences. So, and we all really know this. So why do you work spread out during the week? Why don't you work for the first 30 or 40 hours and then take the rest of it off, 5 days, 5-day weekend? Because the structure of your body is not such to be able to do that. You need rest and you need sleep. If somebody is performing badly at work, why do you just not hit them with negative criticism the whole time until they improve? The structure of the human psyche just isn't such that that's going to get you good results, right? And if you want to build a bridge, why don't you just build it where you want to go? Because some sites are better than others for building bridges. Some have deeper water, some have slower current, some have closer distances between the banks. You've got to work with what you have and cut with the grain of the creation that you see set before you. We capture this in art. It's basically what Jurassic Park is all about, right? It's fiddling with the structure of time and creation, and it has these terrible consequences. So the right way to approach the world, or the natural world in work, is to unfold it and develop it, but to work with it and not against it. So he has to work it. He also has to take care of it. So the image of the garden is beautiful, but it is also delicate. So let's go back to our imaginary garden. Remember that we had some trees, and they were spaced apart so they don't interfere with each other. They're going to need to be trimmed. They're going to need to make sure that they don't overshadow the plants that are trying to go underneath them. We had some bees. The bees are going to have to be kept so that they don't swarm, move away, so they don't pollinate the trees, so they don't become pests. We had a dog. The dog is going to need feeding, it's going to need training, it's going to need exercise. So there are hours upon hours of work needed to maintain the balance, to maintain the proper working of the garden. And that is one of the roles that God gives Adam to do. So what does that actually mean for us? We've spoken a bit about this verse. We've spoken a little bit about imaginary gardens, which you may think is helpful or unhelpful. But if we think perhaps about our day-to-day work, I think there are a couple of things that we should take away from this verse today. The first is about our attitudes, and the second is about our decisions. And then once I've spoken about that, I'll just say a brief word at the end about our expectations. So let's look at what this verse says to our attitudes. We've been given charge of an incredible thing, which is the world and its potential. And it might be that the second thing is actually even more exciting than the first, but either way, that's a tremendous responsibility and one that we should be really thankful for. And when we go out to work, we're being called upon to preserve that world, to take care of it, to maintain it, and then to work it, elaborate it, build upon it, so that it produces and blesses everything and everyone. And this should really affect our attitude, I think, about what we're doing when we're working. Are you a designer? Then, like those who made the bicycle, you're taking the natural properties of the world and you're caring for it by uncovering power or efficiency or beauty or utility. Are you a driver? Then when you go out to work, you're caring for the world by arranging it as it should be. You're taking people from where they, or things, from where they are now to where they want to be. Are you a financial professional? Then actually you're doing something quite similar in a more abstract way. You're taking resources from where they're not being used efficiently to where they will be, we hope, used more efficiently. You're caring for the world that way. Are you in charge of a home? Then you're working with food or with clothing or indeed with your bare hands to harness what the world gives and to create a safe and a happy home. And that is an amazing responsibility and an amazing privilege. And I think we would all do well to consider that as we go about what can even be quite menial tasks, at least in our view. Second are decisions. And I think that there are some slightly harder things here. If one of the purposes of work is to work the garden and take care of it, so this week's purpose of work, well, what kinds of decisions should we be making when we work or when we think about how to work or what work to do? Well, critically, not decisions that destroy the garden. And there are at least two ways of doing that are related to the places that I said Adam did not get put. So God didn't put Adam in, remember, in a wilderness or a bulldozer. So we can destroy the garden in two ways. We can let it grow into a jungle, wild and out of control. But we can also destroy it by turning it into a car park. And that means that as Christians, we should be fiercely committed to two things, I put it to you. One, no jungle. We should be committed to fighting the ravages of nature and the terrible harm that they can inflict on people. So there can be a tendency in some religious quarters to think of natural disasters or diseases as being good things because they're just part of the pattern of the world, or that they strike down the guilty or something like that. But this isn't a difficulty that's confined to religious thinking. There's also a tendency in modern kind of quasi-spiritual thinking to believe that natural and healthy are the same thing. Both of those attitudes, I'd like to suggest, are wrong. The natural world is rich and wonderful, but we must engage with it and work on it and take care of it, restore it to its proper order. And that means that we should firmly support disaster relief, vaccinations, the development of high-yield, disease-resistant crops, because death, pestilence, and famine are not part of the garden. They are, for the eagle-eyed among you, 3 out of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at the other end of the Bible in the book of Revelation. So 1, no jungle, and 2, no car park. So we should, as Christians, be committed to environmentalism. There is no room in Christian thinking for laxity about the way that we use resources, because ours is the solemn responsibility to take care of the garden. So if your work is to take care of a home, can I address you now? We know that 2 of the biggest things that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint are to reduce or even cut out meat and dairy in your diet, and to stop getting on planes. Those are the 2 things. Have you thought about that? Are you considering that? And I don't want you to hear that as, I feel guilty. I want you to hear that as, we have a responsibility. This is our charge. What will we do with it? If your work is paid work, can I ask you, is your work taking care of the garden, or is it destroying it? Now, I'm not going to tell you whether it is or not, because I don't know. And you know your work, and you know that there are ups and downs to it, and you also know that it's not perfect, and I'm not suggesting that it must be perfect. But if you can't honestly say with a straight face that your work is tending the garden, that it's working it and looking after it in the ways that I've tried to describe, can I encourage you to think about how to change that? Or, and this is a luxury that not everybody has, and I realise that, and I stress that I understand that, if you have this luxury, should you think again about the kind of work that you are doing, whether in your organisation or outside it? Now let me end with a brief note about our expectations. Living up to this is hard, and I fail in a number of these aspects that I'd be happy to share with you after this talk. And I realise that a number of the suggestions that I've just made are potentially provocative. I don't know where you are on these issues. But if we're Christians, then our failings in these regards are not the end of the story. For another Adam was placed in another garden 2,000 years ago, where he made a decision to do a work to take care of the world as none of us ever could. And 3 days later, when someone came looking for him, she found a person who looked to her much like a gardener. But that's another story, and perhaps one that we could discuss after the end of this. But for now, let me close in a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of the natural world, and we thank you for its splendid complexity and richness. We ask that you would help us in whatever work we do, always to strive to work according to the pattern of your creation, to work with it, not against it, and to seek to unfold its mysteries, not replace them with our own dogmas. And finally, Father, we praise you for sending us the true and better gardener to live the perfect life and die on the cross so that we could be restored. Amen.